Now, we're looking at this idea that part of what it means to be very, very successful with the American lock is to be able to accommodate failure. You're not going to get the American lock every single time on good opponents, but you will get a reaction every time you use the American lock on good opponents. And the two most common reactions you'll get make sense when you look at the sport of arm wrestling. Most of your opponents are going to try and work to keep their hand inside of their shoulder. But the only way they can do this is to expose their second hand. The other big reaction you're going to get is opponents trying to straighten their arm out to get away from the threat of an American, and that'll feed into your underhook game. So quickly reviewing this, the basic game plan that we're going to work with is the idea that when someone is, they've got two arms there in front of you, if when we go to hit the American lock, we get a reaction where an opponent starts to turn like so, okay, that's going to expose the opposite arm. So when an opponent tries to keep his fist inside of his shoulder and turn out, that's going to be time for us to control the bottom elbow right here. So when he goes to turn, it puts a limit on how far he can turn, and then that exposes the top arm to you. Now from here we come up to our base and step right over our chinny partner's head, and we bring our two legs out and across the body. Once we lock up in here, now we're in the perfect position to separate our chinny partner's hands, and we switch from the American to Jujigatame. Okay, so very important to understand that when someone turns out, we attack the opposite arm. It's also important to understand that when someone goes to turn out, by gripping the bottom elbow, when he goes to turn, it puts a limit on his turn. If Placido tried to get up to his knees, for example, he couldn't do it. The only way he gets to his knees is to pull the elbow through. So you want to make sure you get good control. That stops him in a position where if he tried to come back to you now, it would be difficult because your chest is right there in front of his tricep. That's going to make it easy for us to lock over the opposite arm and then start that action of stepping over our chinny partner's head. As we gather up our chinny partner's two arms, we cast our arms across into the classic Jujigatame position. Okay? Now, some of your opponents, when you go into that initial American lock, are going to straighten the arm. This takes their hand from in front of your chest to behind the shoulder, and that leads right into underhooks. And once we get an underhook, we've got great follow-up attacks. So when we start that thread of that American, he straightens the arm, we come up to our knees. So we switch from the initial sit-out position when the hand is in front of us, and when we see the arm straighten, we switch to our knees. Once we get up to our knees, we put our elbow right there in front of our chinny partner's sternum and come into position like so. Once we get here, the number one option is going to be Kimura. If your opponent proves to have very strong grips and Kimura is difficult for you to separate the arms, don't be afraid to go right back into that threat of Jujigatame. And once we get that Juji threat, you guys know what to do. We tie up both of our chinny partner's arms and we're ready to attack. So the basic idea here can be articulated very simply. When you're dealing with a tough opponent who's not easy to hit with an American lock, be ready for those two most common reactions. When we create that initial threat, if we see him starting to turn out to defend himself, we're going to attack the opposite arm. If, on the other hand, he lengthens his arm, then we attack the same arm. And in these situations, it's either going to be Kimura, if we can separate the arms, or you can always return back into Jujigatame threats if you feel the Kimura is not working for you. Done in this way, you have a very simple but very effective game plan that gets you around failure. Remember, just because the initial American fails doesn't mean your attack overall fails. You're always going to get these very common defensive reactions. And if you're alert and understand what's happening as it unfolds in front of you, you'll get two other great attacks, Kimura and Jujigatame armbar.